for us.
Hi, Kat.
Hello there. Now, tell us about how the papers are covering this third anniversary of the nuclear disaster, well, the tsunami, in fact, in Japan.
That's right. Well, I've pulled a couple of pieces out of the Japanese press. Let's start by looking at the Japan Times, which says that 3 years on, some 267,000 people are still living in temporary housing and other makeshift facilities across the nation. So in its editorial, the Japan Times talks about rebuilding shattered lives. 3 years on, life is still nowhere near back to normal for many victims, and there are growing concerns that the events of March 11th, 2011 are in fact fading fast in people's memory that weren't affected by the disaster. Now, another paper, Yomiuri, carried out a survey among 500 evacuees ahead of the anniversary, and the results are pretty impressive. Fewer respondents said that they actually wanted to go back to their hometown than previously. Now, for instance, in the Fukushima prefecture, only 35% said that they actually wanted to go back. 73% of people were critical of the government for the reconstruction work being so slow.
And they're probably about to get a little bit more critical of the government if the Prime Minister's plans go ahead. They're wanting to switch back on the rest of the country's nuclear power plants, and that's very controversial.
That's right. The nuclear angle is the other big angle of the day. I pulled out two articles. One's from Asahi Shimbun, which points out that in the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster, the Democratic Party of Japan, the administration then, had devised a plan to wean Japan off nuclear energy. But this article says that that legislation was actually, well, it was put to rest when the party lost power in 2012. Now, as you were saying, the current Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, he's drawing a lot of criticism for those nuclear plants. A lot of people in Japan and outside of Japan are saying that, well, he's probably not really learned the lessons from the past. There's an article in Mainichi which talks about the fact that on top of that, the government has actually kind of neglected the Fukushima plant, where some 430,000 tons of contaminated water have accumulated. This obviously has a lot of environmental risks. This article calls on the government to really stand at the helm in decommissioning those Fukushima reactors, even though it could take several decades.
Okay, lots of bleak angles on that story on this third anniversary. Let's move on to other news. El Salvador, a country that we hardly ever talk about, I think. We're talking about them now. They've had a presidential election at the weekend, and apparently it was too close to call. What are they doing about it?
Call? Well, the electoral authorities are recounting now. They say that we could have to wait until Thursday for the results. This is an article in El Mundo, the editorial, which actually says that neither of the two candidates, so you have the left-wing candidate, Salvador Sanchez Seren, and then the more conservative rival, Norman Quijano, well, neither of them can claim a great victory, whoever comes out as the winner. According to this article, the nation is really split in half. Today, more than ever, El Salvador needs a statesman, a leader who can bring the country together, not encourage confrontation. This article reminds us that El Salvador is still very divided 22 years after the civil war, in which 100,000 people died.
Intensely divided opinions in Ukraine as well, in Crimea specifically. More reaction on the events there in the international press, I imagine.
Absolutely, yes. Let's start out with a cartoon in the International New York Times by Shapat. Now, there's a lot of focus on that upcoming referendum in Crimea, and you can see a little voter there casting a ballot, while a Russian tank says, we're the international observers.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that look at the international press. Florence Villeminot there. We're going to take a short break now here on France 24. But do stay with us. When we come back, we're going to have a special report from our correspondents in Japan, 3 years on from the tsunami that triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster.